Okay, so good morning, bon matin tout le monde. On behalf of the France-Ireland Chamber of Commerce, I'd like to welcome you all to this event this morning. It's our first webinar since La Rentrée, and I just would like to say I hope you all had a fantastic summer, some time to enjoy time off with your family and friends, whether it was here in Ireland or in France or elsewhere, but I'm sure you all enjoyed some travel as well this summer, which is a very positive thing for us all. And we do hope that La Rentrée is going smoothly for everyone. And we have over 80 people joining us today, and we're delighted to welcome the members of the France-Ireland Chamber of Commerce, members of the European Movement Ireland who have partnered with us this morning for this webinar, and also many of the associations who are an integral part of the Franco-Irish ecosystem, including, I believe, we have quite a few people joining us from the French Embassy in Ireland and the Irish Embassy in Paris. So you're all very welcome, bienvenue. So today, Margot Slattery, who, as you all know, is the president of the France-Ireland Chamber of Commerce, is going to discuss the European political agenda with Noelle O'Connell, who is CEO of European Movement Ireland, and I'll leave Margot to introduce Noelle in more detail. The topics they will cover will be the scene of the EU developments, the impact of the German federal elections on EU's traditional Franco-German motor, which we had the results of yesterday, so very timely, the conference on the future of Europe and the 2022 French Presidency of the Council of the EU, which starts in January through to June next year. So before I pass you over to Margot, just to remind you that we do have a chat button at the bottom of the screen. We will be leaving time at the end of the session for questions from our participants. So please feel free to put your questions there, and we'll do our best to address them before the end of the webinar at 11 o'clock. So I will now introduce you to Margot. Thank you very much, President. Over to you.
Thank you, Cleona, and thank you for the nice salutations, and good morning, everybody, and hope you're all well. And as Cleona says, very welcome back to, I think, post-summer and autumnal work mode. And we're absolutely thrilled that we're joined by Noelle O'Connell this morning, who's the CEO of European Movement, to chat with us. And I have the honor of not only hosting somebody who I regard very highly in this space, but also who's a friend of mine. So it's a double pleasure, Noelle. Welcome, Noelle. Thank you.
Thank you, Margot.
Thank you, Noelle. And if you don't mind, Noelle, I'll just give people a little introduction to you. I suppose for any of you who don't know European Movement to begin with, it's an amazing organization, a membership organization who really sort of, if you like, looks at what's happening in the scene in Europe and the position in Europe, and helps and advises organizations who are obviously working in the European environment. And when I worked in my former company, we became members many years ago, and I found it a very helpful organization, particularly when I was trying to navigate that space and I was reporting into the UK and then trying to navigate the European space. So that's where I got to know and understand a little bit about the organization. So to talk about Noelle, Noelle was appointed the CEO of European Movement in 2011. And it's Ireland's longest established not-for-profit organisation connecting both Ireland and Europe. She was also a vice president and elected president of European Movement International, which is a great honour. And that is European Movement councils in 34 countries and 38 international associations in November 2020. So congratulations, Noelle. That's fantastic as well. Big scope, no pressure there. And prior to this, Noelle worked in business development, public affairs, members' relations in a variety of sectors and for different bodies across Europe. She's also worked in the third level sector and has managed significant national and international funding projects, which again is no easy task. So things such as SkillNet, Erasmus and European Citizens for Europe and Interreg. And she's also in her spare time, when she does find some spare time, she's a voluntary director of the board of Alliance Francaise. So a very strong connection to our mission here as well. And for chambers, European movement, and people who are coming in from France. So thank you for that, because you will see that connection. And she's the chair of the University College Cork's Dublin alumni chapter. And also in 2017, she had the honor of being named a Knight of the National Order of Merit of France by the French president. So something again that the Chevalier Award, and Noelle, delighted to see that that was awarded to you. I think very, very much justified. And she's been appointed an international leader in the Fellow Society of Leadership Fellows in St. George's House in Windsor Castle. So wow, that's some story, Noelle. And maybe the last two things I'll put in is that Noelle is a keen golfer, and if you ever go to play golf with her, as I have, she's fantastic and has some putts. So really nice to see that, Noelle. And also she's a Cork woman, so she can't help that part. But we'll try, as a Limerick woman, I try and forgive her that. So Noelle, just maybe if we kick off now that I've kind of revealed all your secrets to the world. So in your context of your time as the CEO of the European movement, and since that initial appointment a decade ago, what changes have you witnessed in the European arena?
Well, firstly, thank you, Margot, for that very warm words of welcome. And I have to correct you on one thing. My golf, sadly, is not as good as where it is. Definitely not my putting anyway, but we'll take it from there. But no, thank you for that, and to Cléna and to the France-Ireland Chambers. I'm delighted to speak to you all this morning, as I know we have many synergies in common, as you outlined, Margot. And in terms of changes on the European scene, I think it's fair to say there have been significant changes and developments over the last decade. And really what we have seen is a European Union that is recognizing the fact that we are living in a geopolitically more complex world. We have seen a change in institutional leadership. We have gone through a number of different presidencies. I mean, a big part of my role when I started initially was that Irish EU presidency back in 2013. We had the Troika. We were dealing with the financial crisis. And now, as we look forward to next year, it will be the turn of France in the first half of 2022 to take on the presidency. We have seen a European Union grapple with the challenges of the COVID pandemic, a global crisis, health crisis and emergency on an unprecedented scale, whilst still institutionally the fact that health is a national and a member state competency. So squaring that circle, as we saw in terms of the rollout of the vaccine strategy, has certainly been a challenge. But I mean, I think where we go in the future is a big part of what the Conference of the Future of Europe is about. And that's, I think, an opportunity for your members, for those people listening in on the call today, to get involved and have their say and make sure their views are inputted. And that's a big part of what we want to try and do here as well in European Movement Ireland.
Great, thank you, Noelle. I think there's no doubt that, you know, I'm certainly thinking from my own perspective that the Europe that I saw as a young person is very much changing to the Europe today, and it feels like things have shifted and changed. You know, even the balance of power, and there's no doubt the German election will, you know, bring a lot of change around that as well. So it looks like, you know, it's going to be a swing to the left. Chancellor Merkel will begin to do whatever the next phase is for her in her life. What do you think from the point of view of the German election? I'm sorry, that's probably not one we chatted about, but yeah, it's really recent and I can't ignore it. What do you think from a point of view of how that sort of changes things in Europe?
No, it's hugely relevant and critical, Margot, as you said. I mean, the strong driving force behind much of the historical European integration has, of course, been that Franco-German motor, that Franco-German engine. And obviously that deeply complex relationship, it has defined, it has shaped European history. And I mean, I think an interesting thing that sometimes we perhaps don't take on board as much or reflect on, but is that each phase of the European Union's integration process, each phase of its development, was hugely influenced by the leaders of both France and Germany driving that engine. So from Adenauer and de Gaulle, who laid the very foundations of that post-war Franco-German relationship, to Schmidt, Giscard d'Estaing on the European monetary system, to Kohl and Mitterrand during the times of German reunification, and latterly and most recently, the relationship between President Macron and Chancellor Merkel. That played actually a central role in the European Union agreeing to the ambitious 800 plus billion next generation EU COVID-19 recovery package, which was agreed last year by the EU to help the wider European Union and its member states rebound from the pandemic. So we had 16 years of Mutti Merkel at the helm, and that's a huge change. She has been the preeminent, dominant personality and political force, certainly in Europe, but arguably at one of the key players at a global level. So now what we are seeing is a very interesting, almost, the coalition, how that is going to pan out. Are we going to have a Jamaica coalition, a traffic light system? There's a lot of different changes. I mean, we got to look at the vote that the AfT got in East Germany, the very high level of support there for the Alternative for Deutschland group. So Germany is certainly in a state of transition and will be. And I think that is going to impact and factor in on wider EU developments. And it's going to roll into and roll over into 2022, when, of course, France faces into its own presidential election. So we are in somewhat of a transition, a hybrid, somewhat of a state of flux. And I suppose the steady, stable hand on the tiller that Merkel did have over her 16 or so years in power cannot be underestimated. Did she get everything right? No, but she certainly, in terms of the migration and in terms of maintaining, as we saw former Taoiseach Enda Kenny talk about the role that she played in terms of the Eurozone crisis. I think it'll be a little bit like we'll miss her when she's gone. And I think that's really, in terms of then how the new German government, the new German Chancellor, how that interrelationship with France, how that develops. The outcome of next year's presidential elections. There's a lot of flux, a lot of movement, and I think Europe as a whole hasn't had to deal with that, if that makes sense. Imagine if we had German or French elections during the COVID pandemic. We arguably the next generation EU and that funding package, would that even have gotten through? So we're in a tricky and a somewhat delicate time, and I think patience is going to have to be required in terms of how the negotiations play out. Sorry, that was a long-winded answer.
No, it's great, and thank you for giving us that insight. And particularly when you're talking about the former Eastern Germany and sort of, again, we can't just take it in one view. You have to give that wider perspective. And I think for so many of our members, are really concerned about, so what does that mean for France? What does that mean for the Franco-German as two big stalwarts of the EU? What does that mean for that relationship? And I guess I'm putting my own perspective on it, but I'm thinking that the fact that it's kind of slightly more left-wing viewpoint bodes pretty positively for at least that the world isn't going quite as conservative as we've seen in Eastern Europe. So there's some positives in that, but I'll bet we'll have to wait and see. And obviously, I think the challenges from the whole of the countryside of France for Macron are going to be considerable. And obviously, I don't know if Barnier is still there and what happens with Le Pen and that sort of thing. There are big challenges coming down. So good and interesting to see. Thank you, Noelle. Just moving back to Ireland, sort of keeping us back in the Irish side of things. How has Ireland contributed to the European movement ideals, and what benefits do you believe that we've secured from our contributions?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is, was it a famous, well-known political personality said, we're a country that punches above its weight. And I think it's something that has been the case in terms of former President of the European Parliament and President of Alliance Française, Pat Cox. We have had, you know, to the 5 Secretary Generals of the European Commission, 2 were Irish, Catherine Day, one of our board members here, David O'Sullivan, the European Ombudsman, Emily O'Reilly, the Executive Director of the European Medicines Agency, Emer Cook, most recently, then Dr. Susan Steele appointed the Executive Director of the Sea Fisheries Agency in Vigo. So we've a huge footprint, but I think we can't be complacent and we can't rest on our laurels. So that's why, in fairness to the government and to Minister Thomas Byrne for championing and launching a wider EU job strategy to make sure that there is a strong Irish pipeline for civil servants, to encourage graduates to consider applying for jobs within the EU ecosystem, because quite frankly, we need that footprint, we need that presence, we need to be there, we need to be at the table, and making sure that the viewpoints and the perspectives are that we have uniquely in this country are brought to bear in shaping and influencing the wider European policy agenda. Because we can't, you know, I think I think if there's sadly a sort of a benefit, if I can put it that way, of Brexit, is that we're very aware now and more mindful, which is important, of the need to expend shoe leather in engaging in really face-to-face contacts and dialogue, whether that's virtually in these times that we're in, but the necessity of I suppose cultivating the relationships and connections. And that's why the government strategy in terms of maintaining an EU mission in all countries, notwithstanding the financial crisis, was really welcome and has borne fruit, as we have seen. You know, we have a seat on the UN Security Council. We have a voice, we must use it, and we really need to promote those EU values, respect for democracy, fundamental rights, rule of law, and speak up for that. And I think Ireland, although we are geographically at the periphery, we're very much at the heart, and that can be seen and borne out by the strong Eurobarometer survey, opinion polls, and our own independent poll that we commissioned Red Sea to carry out since 2013, which shows continually over 80%, over 90% in some years support for Ireland remaining an active, committed and engaged member of the European Union.
Great, Noelle. And, you know, love that passion about that. And I think you're so right, because we have to weave our way in and out of things. You know, when you're not, it's like sort of, I suppose, the whole challenge at the moment about being back in the office, when you're not close sometimes and you're trying to do things from far away. How do you find your way to build that relationship? And I agree, I think we have built some fantastic relationships over those years, and we must never stop trying to keep that happen. And I think it's something that the Irish are good at. You know, if anything, we're known for being good in warm relationships with people, but obviously we have to be canny as well, particularly I think around tax and what we give away now, because we're no longer also viewed as the poor relation. We have to be a positive contributor. So we're kind of playing, as they say, on the senior team now, or the senior golf team, etc. No, thank you for that, and that's very helpful. Just sort of thinking about Britain. So, you know, our nearest neighbour, we have very many close relationships. Many of us have family and we do business in Britain. And yet, you know, many would say that Britain is no longer relevant in a European context, although I don't know that that's entirely true, because I certainly see, you know, it may have pulled out from a point of view of Brexit, but there's still a lot of relevance. So, you know, what changes or initiatives from your perspective being introduced and developed with other neighbours such as France? So if we look at that, you know, that has changed, and we are now saying, and, you know, we're actively supporting that France is the nearest neighbour. What do you believe are some of those initiatives, and how might they fall out?
No, absolutely. Well, with thanks to Ambassador Guérin for this mug that I have my morning cuppa every day. Yes, absolutely. Look, France has become Ireland's closest geographical neighbour in the EU since Brexit. And as I mentioned, we both have a seat currently on the UN Security Council. But I agree with you, Margot. I certainly don't think it's true, it's accurate, or it's fair to say that the UK is no longer, relevant in a European context. Look, wearing my European Movement Ireland hat, obviously, whilst respecting the vote, we certainly didn't shy away from our belief that Brexit would be bad for the UK, bad for Ireland, bad for the EU. And I think the reality is being borne out. And the UK's voice, that practical, pragmatic, open, global trading, all that voice and that presence is very much missed. Flip side of that is in terms of closer integration. It's probably less missed, but I think we have a challenge in Ireland on how to navigate both, because obviously it is so important to maintain strong not only East-West relations, but also North-South relations. And I think what we have seen is that the EU are very mindful of the unique impact Brexit has imposed unwillingly on Ireland. But we have to, work with the solidarity that we've been given, and also ensure, as you said, that we continue to promote strong Franco-Irish engagements. And, for example, Ireland joining the Francophonie, and obviously from even as we have seen on a trade perspective, from an energy supply perspective with EirGrid and the Celtic Interconnector. We've also seen a quadrupling of ferry services that increase connectivity between Ireland and the continent, and direct routes actually through that way, compared to previous years, have actually helped try to mitigate the worst impacts of Brexit. But look, I think my final remark on that would be, Britain may not be in the EU, but it is still geographically in Europe, though many of its politicians might sometimes forget that fact. But it will always be relevant in a European context. And I think is actually going to have to expend more of its energies, as we have seen, even in terms of, whilst they might have taken a step back in terms of some of the civil society and business groupings, we're now seeing that they have to even work harder to engage because they're no longer in the room. So that is certainly something that we have seen. But I think we also as well have to be a little bit mindful of the rhetoric and how different countries engage and talk and discuss bilaterally, because I think if we don't have good relations, that's not good for the EU, and it's not good for the continent of Europe, as we have seen when only too recently, when unilateral decisions are taken, not prior consultation, it's not very helpful or conducive to good relations going forward.
No, thank you, Noelle, and very much in agreement again. I think of it like a family. We have many members. It's like a choir. We all have different voices, and we need to find a way to be able to sing harmoniously together. And that's not an easy task. And there are always people who challenge us a little bit, or situations of challenges. But we need to be in that rhetoric together. So no, I think, we get that feeling from our members as well. Just moving on to a couple of more questions from me before we open up to the audience, because there's so much we could talk about. And I think, we could do this for hours. And as you know, when we often chat, this is the big topics. But so thinking about things like climate change, really top of mind for so many of our members now. Is the EU doing enough? I'd love your view on that.
Yeah, really good point, Margot. I think the EU is very lofty in its ambitions, but how we get there is certainly going to be the tricky and the challenging bit for countries, for governments, for businesses, for the business community, for organizations, and for all of us actually as citizens. And what changes will we all have to make personally? It was interesting, in July of this year, the European Commission published its environmental package. Anyway, I didn't come up with the title, but we won't go there, but Fit for 55. So that's what it's called, aiming to cut the EU greenhouse gas emissions by 55% by 2030 compared to the 1990 levels. And that's huge, right? That's going to affect and impact so many aspects of our lives over the coming years, from a travel perspective, energy, land management, construction, all these things. And aiming to make Europe, as it does, carbon neutral by 2050, the European Green Deal, whilst equally trying to ensure a just transition for people impacted. So that those two very ambitious goals and targets remain the European Commission's priorities set out back in 2019. But so how is the EU going to do that? How are countries going to, rather than pay lip service or acknowledge the importance of it, but what are the tangible impacts, and how are the compromises going to be introduced in order to contain that climate crisis? So in fairness to the EU, it is the first major global player to set out in detail how it aims to reach that point of carbon neutrality. But I think a big challenge is going to be building that public support that is going to be necessary and that is going to be required for that very significant change that is going to take place in the years ahead. Because setting targets is one thing, and we can all agree, what was it, St. Augustus or whatever, but reaching them is another. We asked people this year in our Red Sea poll, in terms of the importance in the environment, and over 70+% of people thought that the EU, it was really important what the EU was doing in terms of environmental and the Green Deal and that green agenda. But if that impacts, how much money I have in my pocket, how are we going to navigate that tricky road? So I think Margot, I think the EU is certainly trying to be a responsible global player, but it can't act in isolation on its own. It needs, the US, it needs North, South America, China. It's going to be interesting seeing how COP26 plays out over the coming months. But I think everyone, well, most people, most political and former political leaders seem to accept and recognise the necessity of dealing with climate change, and we just can't afford to wait. But how do we bring the public along with us with the very difficult business, societal, personal changes that are going to be necessary? I think that's going to be tricky.
Yeah, I think very tricky. And the urgency, sort of saying zero net by 2050 or 40 and that sort of thing, and looking at the whole, how carbon goes in and out and the measurement and everything, a lot of people find it difficult to understand. So I think there's going to have to be a strong dialogue with countries as well to help them on that journey. But no doubt this is the most, this is the big stone rolling down the hill at us all. So kind of keeping on the same theme, sorry now, Noelle, another difficult one, but one that's close to my own heart. ESG, do you really believe members of the EU are equipped to meet the standards and new requirements? And are we being kind of frenemies? Are we really, really kind of being challenging enough with each other on this? Excuse me. And how is the EU regarding ESG? So big topic, just love your view.
Yeah, no, it's a great one, Margot, and look, it's something that I know Commissioner Mairead McGuinness, has a huge area of responsibility in this and very mindful of the challenges. And, look, sustainable finance, it does have a key role to play on the policy objectives under the European Green Deal, as well as more broadly, as you alluded to, the EU's international commitments on climate and sustainability through the channeling of that private investment into a transition of climate neutral, climate resilient and resource efficient fair economy, in terms of how we ensure that through a sustainable recovery from the COVID pandemic. We saw again in the Commission in July adopting a number of measures such as the Sustainable Finance Strategy, setting out several initiatives, but also looking at increasing investment and the inclusiveness of SMEs towards that EU transition to a more sustainable economy. The European Green Bond Standard proposal, that's aimed to create a high quality, a voluntary standard for bond financing sustainable investment. And I think the EU has taken ambitious steps, Margot, in this area, and it is you know, looking at and has taken, I suppose, unprecedented foundation steps in terms of the 6 sets of actions that you know that you and your members are all aware about. And I think what we're going to see is the report on those 6 steps and on the strategy taking place by the end of 2023. How will that then in turn actively support member states? You know, how will the regulation on the voluntary European Green Bond Standard, how will that happen? So I think there's a lot of investor appetite, as we've seen, for these bonds, and it's hoped that the EU GBS will set that gold standard. But like, how do you again square that circle of meeting the tough sustainability requirements, protecting investors from greenwashing, and raising funds on capital markets to finance you know, serious ambitious investments? It's certainly going to be tricky. You know, Mairead McGuinness, she's very clear, wearing her commissioner in charge of financial services, financial stability, and the capital markets union. When I was doing a podcast with her over the summer, she was like, Noelle, basically I'm the commissioner for money. And I just said to her, I said, Mairead, that's the best title and portfolio to have, I think it's fair to say. But she's very clear that money flows need to go towards a sustained economy. And you know, again, but what we've seen from an EU level is we can't act in isolation, as we've seen in terms of tax as well. Global cooperation on climate, on these environmental issues, are going to be key, and that ties into the wider ESG agenda.
Thank you, Noelle. And I have one more question, and then we'll go to our audience. And if we've time left, we can come back. And I think, just going back to the ESG, just a final thought on the ESG is that, you know, we need also to challenge Europe, I think, on the S part of the ESG, because, and I know that you know, Ursula von der Leyen has been vocal around the countries that are moving very much to a kind of a very strong rhetoric of a more conservative way of politics, particularly around social change. And I think we'll be challenged as well on the S on immigration. And particularly if climate change continues to accelerate, then we will see so many more millions of immigrants coming to Europe, and again, you know, this question has not gone away. So I think there are many parts of the S that Europe still has to develop a greater maturity, and you know, we can't solve it by sort of putting one flag over it, so to speak. So I think there's a challenge there.
Absolutely. So, I agree with you, Margot, and sorry, just on that point, actually, if I may, I think we need to counter, exactly as you said, that democratic backsliding in some of the EU member states, and more robustly stand up to and defend the values on which the European Union was founded upon, and call it out. And in fairness, I think we are seeing a little bit of a dial change on that. I saw only recently, due to the EU holding back some of the rural development fundings to some of the Polish regions, due to some of the towns and the communities creating LGBT-free zones, we have seen a reversal. And I think in the case of 100 out of 106 towns have now reversed that. So like the dial is well, hopefully will continue to change, but it's not easy. It's certainly not easy. And I think we in Ireland could be an active and a constructive partner and champion on this, because traditionally, as you mentioned, we are good at alliances, we are good at building coalitions, and I think, you know, and I think there's an onus and a responsibility to hold the EU and the institutions and to account. And it's not going to be easy, but it's important, and we must do it.
No, I feel the same. And thank you, Noelle, and good to know it's something I think that we're alerted to. So last one, as I said, and then we'll go to the questions from our members. So big question. We're really going macro now. How does the world view Europe? Somebody put this question in. It's a great question. It's as big and as wide as long. Maybe you can give us a short answer to that one.
Oh gosh, asking a Blarney woman to give a short answer, Margot, as you well know, is never easy. Yeah, look, it's certainly, you know, when there's a crisis, who do we call in Europe? I I think the EU has to become more assertive and assured in its place and in its role, and you know, representing the 450 plus million citizens, and I think it needs to become more confident, but not het up about you know, about certain things. I think it just needs to, you know, realize and recognize that it is the world's largest trading bloc, negotiates trade agreements on behalf of all of us. It is, you know, it's a non-enumerated member of the G7. It is a huge player in terms of the promotion and the defense of human rights. It's development policy, aid, the role it plays in multinational forums such as the United Nations. As we already discussed, Margot, it is at the forefront of international efforts to combat climate change, you know, following on from Paris, COP21. You know, if we can use, and look, I'm wearing green in you know, in support of Limerick, who obviously were deserving All-Ireland hurling winners, she says, through gritted teeth, but they were, in fairness. Cork will be back though. But like, I think what we need to see at a European Union level is less talking about being a global player, less navel gazing on it, and just get on the pitch and just do it. I mean, progress has been made. We must commend some of the work that has to be done in some of the external action. But there is still that challenge of a lack of coherence and capacity to match the European Union's global ambition sometimes with reality, because what we would say is pooled sovereignty does not equal lost sovereignty. We see that in trade, we see that in multilateral climate negotiations, and very clearly we see it next door with what's happening in the UK. But those principles need to be recognised in some aspects of foreign policy. So whilst recognising the challenges and the difficulties, as you mentioned, Margot, in terms of always getting, you're never going to agree with every member of your family, and trying to get 27 to agree is a challenge. I think the collective willpower, the capacity, the commitment, the motivation to do good and to do better should not be underestimated, and we just need to be ambitious and get on with it. And hopefully that drive and that ambition will come forward and come out of the conference on the future of Europe that's taking place across the European Union. And, you know, I have the honour of being the national citizen representative of Ireland. So that was an open recruitment process. Let me just put that out there. And so it's a great pleasure and honour to represent Ireland in that forum. And I really want to get the views of business, of your members and stakeholders to feed that back in, because the EU really does need to listen and kind of be ambitious, and that's what my hope is. So,
well, great, thank you, Noelle. And I think you'll find there's no shortage of our members who are short of views or feedback or really interesting perspective. And just picking up on a few of the questions, and I'll maybe ask them one by one because they're quite different. And then if there's something we don't get around to, Cleona will gladly forward you the core part of the question, if that's okay. So the first question from one of our members was, and this was a sort of a long one, so I'll try and parse it out. The person asked, can they raise the fallout experience by Irish owners of French leaseback properties? So this has been highlighted by an investigation by the DGCCRF in France that has been sent to the public prosecutor in France. And there were 168 submissions by Irish owners. So Irish MPs such as Claire Daly, Commissioner McGuinness are fully aware of the heartache that many people have suffered. And the member says if we're not aware, that they gladly can email you privately to give you some info. So if you don't have the answer today, I'm sure a member will understand.
And apologies to the member who's posed that question. I have to confess I'm not familiar with the issue or the situation to hand, but if they wish to follow up with me, I'm very, very happy to have them do that. But apologies, I'm afraid I'm not on top of that issue.
Don't worry, not a problem. And Cleona, if you're happy to be the connector there, that would be fantastic. So the next question is, Noelle, do you have any sense of what impact the French election will have on activity around their EU presidency? So I know you chatted around it, and that was Porrick Sline from AirGrid. He's happy to be identified here, and he says, for the shout out on the interconnector. So obviously Just any further thoughts other than what you've said before, not to repeat the same?
Yeah, no, look, it's a great question, Porrick, as ever, and I think it's interesting that France is going to have its presidential election taking place. I think the first round is April the 10th, if I'm not mistaken, and that's bang smack in the middle of the midway checkpoint, which is traditionally a very busy point of the presidency. So that's going to be a challenge, I think. In terms of rolling out and delivering on some of the agendas, how our facilitate dialogues, just not at the council, not just at council meetings. It'll be France's 13th time holding the presidency. I think their last presidency was under President Sarkozy back in 2008. So they had a difficult presidency then as well, because we had the initial no here in Ireland to the Lisbon Treaty, the financial crisis. So next year, France wants its presidency motto to be recovery, power and belonging, and focusing on the priorities of budgetary rules, digital transition, climate change, and social rights. But that, how, in terms of, if I was being honest, in terms of how the elections will impact on the presidency, it's certainly going to, it is going to have to. And how and as well, the conference on the future of Europe is due to conclude during the French presidency. Now we're hearing rumours on the grapevine that it may possibly be extended. But there's a lot of issues that they'll have to deal with in terms of being bound up in the European Commission's work programme, the COVID-19 crisis, and a lot of them are aligned to Commission President von der Leyen's State of the Union address, which had a distinctly Franco flavour to it, if your members might have picked up on. So I think it's certainly one to watch, but I would have realistic expectations, Porrick. I think the ambition will have to be realistically aligned to the practicalities of a presidential election taking place in France at the same time as their presidency. So.
Thank you, Noelle. And yeah, I think it's certainly going to need a lot of pragmatism as we look at this going forward. And as someone who spent some time in France, I can certainly see the impact, I think, of the current French government versus perhaps what those in the countryside in France see, how the social change should be and everything. I think it's going to be a difficult one. Now moving on to our next question. I love the fact that somebody's picked up on the senior golfer hurling. Now that we're playing senior golfer hurling or camogie, there seems to be a facet of the online pro-Brexit debate that gleefully sees Ireland being a net contributor as a bad thing. So does this need to be done to accentuate this fact of life as a naturally positive development in our relationship, seeing the EU and what it delivers or opens up to Ireland as more than purely the financial transactions it has traditionally been presented as? And the person says, I ask this as someone who is working primarily on developing EU funding proposals and trying to balance the financial bottom line with the other values of knowledge exchange, access to learning from abroad, etc. And Ronan Gingles from Cork City Council. Great question.
Yeah, great question, Ronan. No, thank you for that. I think the days of us viewing our relationship with the EU in purely monetary financial terms and brown envelopes being waved coming off planes from Brussels, that's gone. Yes, we are a net contributor, but I would see that as a positive to how much the Irish society, Irish business, Irish economy has grown and developed since over 40 plus years of our European Union membership. And you're right. I think we have to manage that narrative and bring people along with us and have that discussion and debate. And the fact that, as we have seen, having access to a single market of over 450 million citizens is a massive opportunity. Being part of, and then as we saw as well in terms of Brexit, the solidarity from EU member states are ensuring that they are supporting and working with us to lessen the impact of Brexit on the island of Ireland. And in terms of you know, yeah, there is so much more. It's not just about the money. It's about what we bring, what we contribute, and I think it is certainly something that we are going to have to be very mindful of and continue to work and to remind everyone on a regular and an ongoing basis. But it's certainly a great question, Ronan, and I think you'll know from your work about how important that knowledge exchange, that access, and the role that the transnational EU proposals give, and that rich and breadth and diversity of views is hugely important and valuable.
You know, well, and I think really good to get that insight and that feedback as well, and to, I suppose it's something, as Roland says, that we all need to start thinking about and to be able to articulate.
Yeah, well, when we say, I mean, I kind of often say that, and it's easy from a political perspective, Margot, we tend to, you know, nationalize success and Europeanize failure and blame Brussels. And in some cases, that's it's certainly valid, but not in a lot of cases and a lot of time. And I think we have to, you know, take ownership of decisions we also make at a national level, and be responsible that way.
Thank you, Noelle. Noelle, it's another question, slightly different, and a great question as well from Trish Werner. How can we encourage Irish third level students to go to France on work assignments, internships? Do we see a political will to do so? And are there many initiatives in place to encourage that? I think great forward-looking question.
Yeah, great question, and thank you, Trish, for that. I was lucky enough to do my own Erasmus in Lyon in France, and you know, I always say it was the best year of my life. There are many times I'd love to be back doing my Erasmus again, but I think you're absolutely right. I think we need to, you know, like French is has the largest student numbers learning it as a language. We need to work to promote that. Recently, in as Margot mentioned, President von der Leyen State of the Union address last week or the week before last. She mentioned this new European initiative called ALMA to promote student learning and also foreign exchange between young people across Europe to supplement and support Erasmus and Erasmus Plus. So I think that's hugely welcome. Now we have to kind of get into the details and see how it all pans out, because it's only sort of a couple of weeks being announced. But I think initiatives like that, working through the Europe for Citizens programs as well, there's huge opportunities there that may take a wee bit of work, and I'm sure colleagues in the embassies would be very happy to support as well. But there's certainly great opportunities for people to engage and encourage. And what we need to see is more Irish people, quite frankly, with foreign language skills, with competent levels of French, because that's necessary to go through then to follow on, Trish, in terms of the EU pipeline, that job strategy that I spoke about as well. So it's all interlinked. It's all part of a really important ecosystem, and hopefully we are going to see more of the dots being joined up at primary level, secondary level, and we really need to focus on foreign language learning in the education system. We had a very good meeting with Minister Simon Harris as well, and it's something that Minister Harris and Minister Thomas Byrne are really, really mindful of. So I look forward to working with them to ensure that there's greater language learning amongst our student population here at all levels.
No, thank you, Noelle, and I think it's an incredibly important point. Again, you know, I see so many, particularly we get stagiaires and interns from France into Ireland through the embassy and through the working together with the French business. And, you know, it's fantastic to see their ability to come here, and really love to see more and more of ours go back and obviously develop that opportunity to have a great European language that is so useful in so many countries as well. That's also the part. So no, I think we're agreed on that. Just another question from one of our members, from Charles Adair. Would you believe what are the three main threats to Europe, to EU today? How can the Franco-Irish partnership be improved? So two big ones there. Noelle, thank you.
Gosh, I should have had an extra coffee for that one, Charles. Thank you. Great question. Three main threats. Well, I think we touched upon that wider climate, if I can put it that way, environmental global challenges on that. And I want to say the big one is the geopolitical challenge in terms of populism and an undermining of the very principles and foundations on which the European Union is based. But as we saw in the recent German elections, broadly, the centrist vote, if I can put it that way, held its own, and that is that certainly is something I think that's very welcome and something to be noted and commented upon. That the extremes on either side didn't subsume the centre middle ground in terms of the voting. So I think that climate, that populism to the rule of law, and I think how we work with citizens and bring communities and people along with us as we cope and deal with these very existential, fundamental, geopolitical, societal, economic, business challenges, and even as we have seen in terms of the COVID pandemic, to make it a fairer, more sustainable and more just recovery. It's not the new normal, it's a better normal, and how do we do that? And then in terms of the Franco-Irish relationship, I think that's, I have to say, wearing my many hats, if I can put it that way. The Franco-Irish relationship really is going from strength to strength, and that's at all levels in terms of political bilateral engagement, but also, if I may, chapeau and great credit is due to our diplomats, to our civil servants, to our ambassadors, to the staffs in both embassies, to trade associations and colleagues, Margot, like yourself, like Cleona, your members, and to all bodies and entities, and I'm going to include ourselves in European Movement here, but to those of us with an outward, external reach and focus, and who want to engage and strengthen those bilateral relations to make them work even better. And whether, I mean, my first job out of college was working on an interreg program between the southeast of Ireland, the southwest of Wales, and Brittany and France. And I just remember bringing businesses, SMEs, trade associations between those three regions together. And it was just fantastic for me to see, a local manufacturer of jewelry products in Waterford expand and grow and sell into Brittany. And that was done via an Interreg funded project about opening and creating trade and business and people links. And I mean, I think that's at the heart and the cornerstone of the Franco-Irish relationship, and long may it last and continue, except on the rugby field. But, apart from that.
Thank you, Noelle, and I agree totally. I mean, I think we all need to support and dig deep and find these ways. And, we were very lucky last week. We met the new director of French-Irish Business France, Arnaud, and there's just absolutely just such a will by the ambassadors and the staff and the teams everywhere to make it work well. Noelle, I want to take the opportunity just to say a huge thank you, because I can see it's 10:56 and I'll hand over to Cleona in a second to close us up. But, big thank you from the Chamber, from me as its president, and from Cleona and the team in the executive for all the work in setting this up, for your time. We usually, and just say to everybody who's on the call, this isn't the first time Noelle does things for hers. We often, when we want to get a panelist or to get someone from the EU on, Noelle's my route to try to get things. So we always appreciate that. And we hope you'll join us at one of our events this year and be part of us. And thank you so much for all you do. And thanks for the time this morning. And, we've only grasped the beginning of this. There was so much more. I had about another 20 questions I haven't got around to this morning, but we will again. So thank you, Noelle. Have a great morning. And thank you, everybody, for joining. And Cleona, I'll just hand back to you if that's okay.
Great. Merci beaucoup, Margot and Noelle. This conversation was amazing. Thank you very much. I won't add much more to what Margot has said. Just to let you know, that this is recorded, so it will be available for all the participants to go back, because there was a lot of content in the conversation. Thank you so much, Noelle. That was fantastic to hear your views on the EU political agenda. And also, Margot, thank you for moderating today and guiding the discussion to make it so fruitful and informative. So I would like to finish on the positive note that, yes, the Franco-Irish relationships are going from strength to strength. We are seeing that at the Chamber. We are continuing to welcome new members. And I know there are some people here today who have not yet joined, but if you are interested in Franco-Irish business relations, I would suggest you contact us and we will gladly have a chat with you. And finally, just to finish off, just to remind you that our first live event is going to be on the 25th of November in the evening, when we will celebrate the key players in Franco-Irish business in the presence of An Taoiseach Micheál Martin. So more details will be out very soon on that. So once again, merci beaucoup, bonne journée à tout le monde et à très bientôt. Merci.